really want to welcome Ashleigh, who is here from the National Museum of Scotland, who's one of the entomology curators, mostly with a focus on beetles, particularly the carrion beetles, which is Ashleigh's particular passion, especially. But actually, so are, I think, most groups of insects, but the carrion beetles definitely have a special place. Ash is a fantastic engager in well, entomology and wildlife in general, and I know it speaks terrifically on them. We're going to see that tonight, and is very keen to inspire other people, especially inspire the next generation of people to go into entomology. So, without further ado, Ash, over to you, and thank you very much for coming to do the talk.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Stuart. And thank you to all of you that are joining on this kind of cold and wet evening. I'm based in Edinburgh and it's not too nice tonight. So let me just get my screen sharing for you. Okay, how's that look, Stuart?
Yeah, that's fine. Oh, that looks good.
Excellent. So I am keeping it a little broad tonight for you folks. I hope that's okay. Stuart said, can you come talk on beetles? And it is such a huge subject. So we're going to do a bit of a whirlwind through some of the importance of beetles, some of the most commonly encountered groups of beetles that we can find in Scotland and beyond. Also, the particular types of habitats and places that you can look for beetles, the kind of equipment you can use to look for beetles. And then, as Stuart indicated, we are going to talk about some of my favourite beetles, and those are the carrion beetles. So let's see if we can fit this all in for you this evening. Now, a little bit about me. As Stuart said, I'm a curator of entomology and I'm based with National Museum of Scotland. And I actually spend most of my time at our collection centre, which is in the north of the city, in Granton in Edinburgh. And it's really a series of warehouses. It doesn't look like much from the outside, but when you get behind the scenes, this is where the collection is stored and researched and cared for. So the specimens and objects that are on display in the museums form about 5% of the collection. So our insect collection contains a whopping 2.5 million specimens, and it's really my job as one of the curators to facilitate access to that collection, whether that's for researchers, local naturalists, students or artists, and really just share this wonderful resource that we have, because it really does have so many different applications. But that said, I'm not here to talk all about the collection today. I am here to talk about beetles. So beetles have my heart. I actually started out with flies, but beetles soon won me over. And beetles, for those of you that maybe aren't familiar, I'm going to go right back to basics, so don't you worry. The order for this name of insects is Coleoptera, and that actually means sheath-winged and refers to the key ID feature that all beetles share, and that's that they've got these hardened forewings that give them this sort of shell-like appearance. And we refer to these forewings as elytra. So that's a key ID feature that all beetles possess. They might come in slightly different shapes and sizes and obviously colours and textures and things, but all beetles have elytra. They also have chewing mouth parts. That's another feature. Now, the thing that I love most about beetles is probably their diversity, and they really are mega diverse. They are the largest group of insects, representing 1/5 of all living organisms on this planet. And that means that 1/4 of all animals are in fact beetles. So putting this into a bit of context, in the world, we've got over 10,000 bird species, right? Well, globally, we've got over 400,000 species of beetle. And in the UK alone, over 4,000. So that's just getting across some of that diversity for you. And what's really benefited beetles is that they've been around a really, really long time. So they actually co-evolved with flowering plants, and they are what we like to call the original pollinators. So, oh, we've skipped ahead too many. Sorry, let's go back. The original pollinators. We'll come to some more pollinators shortly, but let's have a look at that diversity. They are incredible. all those beautiful different shapes, sizes, colours, structures, textures. It's really what I love about beetles. And I'm very privileged that working with the collection, I get to see all this diversity. I actually can sort of travel the world and see beetle biodiversity without leaving the collection. But of course, there's nothing better than getting outside and seeing these beetles alive and witnessing all their wonderful behaviours. So we're going to look at some of that. Now, just to hone in and give an example of one family, we've got weevils, and weevils are an incredible group of beetles. They have that kind of charming appearance. I think most people think that weevils are quite cute. They have the very iconic rostrum. Sometimes it's quite short and straight, but other times it's a great big long piece of apparatus that's curved. And a great example of that is the one on the bottom right here, which is the acorn weevil, or one of the acorn weevils. And this bizarre beetle has an ingenious method where the female will use that really long rostrum to drill a hole into an acorn. She'll then, once the hole is satisfactorily deep, she'll reverse and she will lay an egg into that hole because her offspring is going to eat the acorn. All sorts of other weird and wonderful tactics that weevils have. The one above that is one of the leaf rolling weevils. And if you ever have noticed a birch tree with lots of leaves that have sort of turned into little, almost like cigar shapes, these clever female weevils will actually use the leaf and to create a little protective shield for their eggs and for their larvae to then develop into. So they've got all the food that they need and nice shelter and protection from any predators. So really, again, remarkable behavior. But weevils, the reason I've picked these is because they are the largest family of beetles in the world, over 80,000 species globally. And in the UK, we've got more than 500. So really worth mentioning weevils. Now, I'm calling this a talk about Scottish beetles, but really, we don't have very many species that are just Scottish. And what I mean here is that they're endemic. Endemic meaning that they don't occur anywhere else in the world but Scotland. We just actually have a couple of species like that, and one of them is a beetle that's actually a weevil. So it's this little thing here, and unfortunately it's so uncommon that I didn't have any photos of this beetle live. I've had to get a picture of one of the specimens from the collection, and you can see here a map showing its distribution. So this is a scarce subspecies of weevil that's only found on the Outer Hebrides there. As I mentioned, they're pollinators. So of course I couldn't talk about beetles being pollinators without showing one of our most iconic, adorable little beetles, and that is the bee beetle. I hope that you've had a chance to see this one before. If you haven't, maybe venture into the Highlands this spring, summer. They are incredible mimics. So as their name suggests, they are mimicking bees, and they have a fantastic series of bands on their elytra, those wing cases, and a nice yellow base. So it looks like a stripy, fuzzy bee. They've also got that nice dense covering of hair on their pronotum, on their thorax, and on the underside. So really, from a distance, when one of these beetles is flying, you would be forgiven for assuming it was a bee because it is quite convincing. Another beetle that, again, we're changing tact here and looking at a completely different scale is pollen beetles. So if you look at a dandelion in the spring, you might notice lots of tiny little black dots on it, and those are most likely to be pollen beetles. So again, I think all too often when we talk about pollinators, we're thinking about the bees, we're thinking about the hoverflies and the butterflies, and we're not really thinking about beetles. But beetles have been pollinating plants for a very, very long time, and long before bees even evolved. So next time that you're hearing lots of information about pollinators, make sure that you think about beetles. Now, my favourite groups of beetles are those that do the thankless tasks of decomposing all the nasty waste matter that we really dislike. So I'm talking about things like dung, dead bodies, also dead wood. Decomposers are essential in our habitats because they're breaking down all of that nasty waste matter and turning it into new life. And so dung beetles are a great example of this. We actually have over 60 species of dung beetle in the UK, and you might not realise that because many of them are tiny. So like this one on the left-hand side here, this is one of the aphrodine dung beetles, and it's what we call a dweller. So it's spending most of its life cycle completely in a dung pat. The adults are moving around, feeding, mating, and breeding. So the larvae then develop in the dung. And these beetles are incredibly important for our ecosystems because not only are they removing the organic waste by consuming it, they're also then food for lots of other wildlife, and they're helping to aerate the soil because some of the other species, like the one on the right here, one of our woodland door beetles, is actually a tunneler. So this individual, if it's a female, is going to be taking sausage-shaped clumps of dung underground, and she's going to dig a tunnel and provision that tunnel with a chamber at the end, provision that chamber with some dung and lay her egg. So her larva has a nice food source there to develop on underground and is safe from predators. So by doing that, they're helping to, again, break down that matter, aerate the soil, provide food for other wildlife, and also remove the parasite load and reduce the parasite load in the dung. So really, really vital. And unfortunately, research in the recent years has found that our dung beetles are doing terribly. A report several years ago looked at both the current data of where dung beetles are now and also historic data from museum collections and the literature, and actually found that 25% of our British dung beetles are facing declines, and they are considered to be nationally rare. They also found 4 extinctions of dung beetles from the UK, which has happened just within the last 50 years. And this is likely to be due to the use of ivermectins, which are antibiotics that are given to livestock to treat the internal parasites that they can get. And it unfortunately makes the dung toxic for the dung beetles. So it's pretty bad news for dung beetles. But if we can all spread that awareness of how important they are for our environment, we may be going in the right direction. Now, many beetles are predators, and of course we need these essential predators, these invertebrate predators, in our habitats because they're helping to create that balance, maintain balance in our ecosystems. So predators like these ground beetles here are feeding on other insects, other invertebrates, and they often have to be quite agile and fast moving. And none of them are quite as fast as our tiger beetles. If you've ever tried to get a photo of a green tiger beetle, you'll know what I'm talking about. These beetles are so fast that when they're running, their vision momentarily turns off. It's too fast for them to focus. So really remarkable predators. And you'll notice that in my photos, I have a lot of them held in my hand or on the finger. And I think that I hope that this gives you a sense of scale. So you can see that the one on the top right-hand corner here, this is a springtail stalker, and it's one of the smaller ground beetles that we have. But you can see it has huge eyes, and that's because it's such a keen predator. It's got to be looking out for any movement of those springtails or aphids that it's stalking. Now, of course, it's not just ground beetles that are predatory beetles. We've got lots of other beetles, like some ladybirds are predatory, rove beetles are predatory, and of course, water beetles are predatory. So I've got a little clip here. Hopefully that one's going to play for you. So you can see just how fast these little swimming beetles are, and they're really aided by some fantastic legs. So for the swimming that they do, they possess these sort of paddle-like back legs, and these back legs are covered in setae, or also known as hairs, really, and that gives them a good surface area through which to paddle through the water. They are very fast, and that's because they actively pursue their prey. They don't kind of wait and pounce. They will actively pursue prey in the water. And the males of this particular species of diving beetle have very fancy front feet. So their front legs have these suction pads on them, and these are actually used in mating. So the females are said to have a slippery wing cases, and the males have these suction pads to help them cling onto her. But what's been interesting with this is that this female has evolved to actually counteract that, and she has strong grooves on her elytra. And it's thought that it's because of the risk that mating poses to the female, as it means that they're a bit more vulnerable to predation when they are mating. So the male and female here are working against each other. Really, it's a bit of a funny one. But yes, these are predatory beetles and really fantastic to see. Now, of course, we often think of insects being the bottom of the food chain, and they are very valuable in our ecosystems because they're eaten by lots of other animals. But I don't want to talk about hedgehogs and birds just now. And many beetles are actually food for other insects as well. So let's think of them as hosts, because there are lots of parasitoids that will target beetles. And this is an example here of a ladybird that's targeted by a parasitic wasp. Now, unfortunately, I haven't got a picture of the parasitic wasp for you. It's rather small and black, and it will target a ladybird and will find a small crack in the exoskeleton of the ladybird in which to inject its egg. And this egg will develop inside the ladybird, carefully feeding on the non-essential organs of the ladybird. It's really remarkable that it does this. It then erupts from the underside of the host and causes the ladybird to become a zombie. The ladybird is then paralyzed, and she will protect the cocoon of the wasp that it constructs underneath. So this is really beneficial for the wasp because it means that other potential predators are not going to see it. It may even be protected from hyperparasitoids, other wasps that might try to target it. And what's really remarkable here is that the ladybird is paralyzed. As I said, it becomes a bit of a zombie and it's just forced to stay in that position. But some of these beetles can actually survive this process. And I had one that I was monitoring on our grounds at work, and this actually happened. I wanted to collect it and watch this behavior happen inside a sealed environment, but I wasn't quick enough. And actually the next day I came back and the ladybird had gone and the wasp had emerged. Of course, it is possible that that one was predated on, but it is unlikely with ladybirds because of their warning coloration. They aren't predated on as much. But yes, it's nice to think about insects as food for other insects too, and not just other animals like birds and other wildlife. Now, I also wanted to mention some of the techniques and behaviors that these insects deploy in order to defend themselves. There's a whole variety of different tactics, so we've not got time to go into that many of them today. But one that's really remarkable that if you haven't seen, I thoroughly recommend trying to find one of these beetles is a click beetle. They get their name because of the noise that they produce when they do their clicking behavior. And so what they are equipped with is a spine on their underside, which actually fits perfectly into a little notch. And they are able to release this spine from its notch, and it causes them to flip themselves into the air. Now, this has two benefits to them. If they were trying to avoid a predator, they would very, very rapidly escape by launching themselves in the air. Also, if they're a beetle and they're getting stuck on their back, which does sometimes happen, they can right themselves by doing this maneuver. Fantastic. And it does make an audible click, which is how these beetles get this common name. Really fantastic. And actually, I thoroughly recommend having a search on YouTube for some of these slow motion videos of this because it's absolutely brilliant. Now, some other beetles actually just hide in plain sight. They may have fantastic camouflage, they may be blending in perfectly with the host plant that they're on, and that is true to some extent with tortoise beetles. Many of the tortoise beetles that we have in the UK are green, and you can see the adult here in the bottom right. But actually, what's most interesting is the larvae. So the larvae of tortoise beetles have some crazy tactics in which they conceal themselves using their own feces. So what you can see here is this larva with all its spines on it. It's actually, its feces are being piled up onto its back. And so from above, to a predator or to you and I, it just looks like a bit of muck on the leaf. a little bit of frass or something, a little bit of insect poo, it doesn't look like a nice juicy larva. So it's going to conceal itself by having this little poop shield. How great is that? And then another example here is safety in numbers. And I'm actually going to suggest that this is something you could go and look out for over the winter. There are many ladybirds that will overwinter, and sometimes you may even find that they come into your homes to do this. Some will use outbuildings, some will use tree trunks to do this. But what we're finding is also that ladybirds actually really like to congregate on gravestones. So if you have a cemetery near you this winter, why not go and see if you can find some overwintering ladybirds? Now, this particular example here is of some orange ladybirds in a cemetery near me in Edinburgh. And they cluster in this way for a couple of reasons. There is safety in numbers, so if there's more of you, you're maybe less likely to be eaten because some of your friends might be eaten. But also in the spring, when the temperatures become warm enough and it becomes time to start feeding again and maybe looking for a mate, they don't have to travel very far. So 2 good reasons why they huddle together in this way. It's also worth pointing out that the orange ladybird is not a predatory species, and it's one that actually feeds on fungi. So, other than graveyards and cemeteries, where else can we go looking for beetles? Well, the great thing about beetles is that they do occur pretty much everywhere. So whether you're going on a woodland walk, a river walk, maybe you're going to some moorland, heathland, or it's the summertime and you're strolling through a meadow, you can find beetles pretty much everywhere, even in the city and even in your homes. So what do we use as entomologists? I missed that one. Also, yeah, you might go looking in some of their favourite food. What do we use as entomologists then to find beetles? Well, number 1, a hand lens. Now, I'd actually recommend, if you're starting out, this is the most important piece of kit that you could get. And if you're trying to inspire the next generation or maybe interest a young naturalist, this might be a really great Christmas present. Being able to see the tiny details of insects up close can really spark a lot of wonder and interest. And so I thoroughly recommend it. You can also use a hand lens with your camera phone if you want to get a cute little macro picture of an insect. So thoroughly recommend starting with a hand lens. Everything else is really optional. And a lot of these things you can even make yourselves. So here is just a few of the tactics that people studying beetles deploy. We've got beating, which really is, as it says, beating a stick against some shrubs or a tree. And that is just to dislodge any of the beetles there. And you basically hold a white sheet underneath. If it's pale coloured, that means that the insects are going to stand out nicely, give you a better chance of spotting them. Some people use an upside down umbrella if you can find a white one. And then it's really just a case of being very careful and looking to see which beetles you've got. Another option is sweeping. So if you were to go and look for some beetles in a meadow, you might sweep your net through, and we sort of go in a figure of 8 motion with the net. And then some of us put these nets over our heads. And this is mostly for collecting flies. The thought behind this is that the net goes over the head, and flies and some other insects have a tendency to go up the way to try and escape, but they're caught in the net, and then that gives you more time to examine what you've got and maybe put something into a pot for closer inspection. But beetles don't tend to fly away too quickly, so I usually would just peer into the net rather than doing this. I just thought it was a bit funny. And another one is sifting. So a great place to find beetles is in the leaf litter, and particularly in the winter months. Obviously, they're nestling down to spend the colder months somewhere nice and sheltered and warm, and leaf litter is really important in giving them that protection. So you could come along and sift through the leaf litter with this device here. It has a sieve in the center part and then a bag underneath. So it filters out all the big chunks of leaves and debris, and the beetles fall through into the bag below. And again, you would then place those contents onto a white sheet or tray, or deploy another tactic. And another piece of equipment with a funny name is a pooter. It's also known as an aspirator, and this is a really valuable piece of equipment for being able to vacuum up very small beetles into a chamber so you can get a closer look at them. Now, I only learnt recently that the pooter was actually invented by a chap called Frederick William Poos, and so that's why it has the name pooter. And here is a selection of some of my pooters that I have used. My current one is the one with the yellow cap. It's my favourite. And they are great because you can, this kit can actually help you get into little crevices like here at the side of a river on a shingle bank and capture those beetles that are quite fast moving. It's very hard to sometimes pick up a beetle that's very small with your bare hands. So being able to get the tube of the device near to the beetle and doing a quick suck in, that enables you to capture that beetle. Now, I'm pretty sure every entomologist has had a bit of an accident with one of these pieces of equipment, in that occasionally there'll be a malfunction and there's a piece of gauze or netting over one of the ends of the tube so that you don't inhale a beetle. But I must admit, I have had an incident where I did inhale a very small beetle. It wasn't too nice, but just additional protein, I guess. So here's a quote from one of my former professors, and he said, "I'm sure that most, if not all of us, have managed to end up with a mouthful of small insects." So that's entomology for you. Another method is a passive method of setting a trap known as a pitfall trap. And this is pretty much just like a cup or yogurt pot sunk into the ground. And the most important part is that it is flush with the ground surface. You don't want it sticking up above the ground. You want it nice and flush so that beetles walking past would just fall straight in and not be able to get back out. Now, there's certain ethics that you should consider during setting any of these traps. And this one is to make sure that you don't leave these traps out for very long. If you're putting these traps out, then you really should be checking them daily and trying to avoid any non-target species from falling in. So things like mice and voles, you would want to put a gauze over the top so that they weren't going to fall in, because those aren't what we're after. We're after beetles. Now, if you wanted to learn how to do this, the NHM, the Natural History Museum, have a great video on how to make one yourself. So perhaps Stuart can drop a link in the chat to that one for us. But there are actually massive pitfall traps out there already, and I just don't think we're utilising them enough. So here's a little example of some collecting that I did when I was on the Isle of Egg last year. It had rained and these cattle grids were full of quite a bit of water. And unfortunately, some of these beetles had been trapped. Now, I must have released about 30 beetles that day from a couple of different cattle grids, but some of them unfortunately had died, so I was able to salvage these for the collection. I think it had about 8 different species and at least 30 or so specimens. So if you're just getting started with beetles, why not have a look in cattle grids and see if you can find any that have already passed away and test your identification skills. And one other method is light trapping. Have we got any moth trappers in the room tonight? I hope so, because a lot of people will do light trapping for moths, but actually there's a ton of other wildlife, especially beetles, that will get attracted to these lights too. A lot of these beetles are obviously nocturnal, and this one here is a lovely maybug, also known as a cockchafer. I think this is the common one. And in Scotland, we do have a northern species, which is scarce. So that's one to look out for. They look very, very similar. I can provide some identification resources if anyone's interested. So on that note, there are other beetles that are attracted to light, and those are my favourites. So we're now switching over to talk about carrion beetles. Now, a little disclaimer. You might have seen some photos of me with dung and bare hands, but when talking about carrion, looking at carrion and doing any work with carrion, it is very important to know that I do wear gloves, I promise. Now, I like to refer to this group as nature's undertakers. They are incredibly important in this process of recycling when it comes to organic waste, and we're particularly talking about dead animal remains here. And they are from a subfamily of beetles called rove beetles. This is a recent change. They used to be their own family, but in the world of taxonomy, where the scientists decide what things lie where in the system of classification, these beetles have recently changed. So they are now a subfamily. You heard it here first, folks. So we have 21 species that have been recorded in the UK. And most of the group are associated with carrion. But we do have a few in there that are actually predators, and we have a couple as well that are plant feeders. So they're not all carrion feeders. But most iconic are probably the burying beetles. And if you have run a light trap, then you'll know what I'm talking about. You may have encountered these already. If you haven't heard about them, well, buckle up. They're a really fantastic group because they have a really interesting natural history. They have biparental care, which means that both male and female work together to raise the offspring. And so you can see this delightful setup here with a dead mouse. What we have is basically the male and female will locate a small dead animal, whether that's a bird, mouse, vole. It's usually of that sort of size. We're talking songbird being the maximum. And they will work together, and they're going to bury that carcass. They're then going to strip it of any fur or feathers because they need good contact with the skin. They're doing all of this like underground, and they can then preserve the carcass by coating it in secretions. Now, it's been found that these secretions actually contain preservatives that help slow down the decomposition of the carcass. So they're preserving what is going to be their baby food for much, much longer. Now, these beetles do come with a bit of competition, of course, and that's the whole reason that they're burying this corpse in the first place. So there's, of course, lots of other animals that might be interested in a dead mouse or a dead bird. You might have foxes or badgers, or maybe a bird of prey. They are going to be doing this behavior as quickly as they can to conceal it and to keep this resource just for them. You'll notice on this beetle on the left that there are lots of smaller things on its back. Now, I'm sometimes asked, are these the offspring? No, they're not. These are actually what we call phoretic mites, and they are hitching a lift on the beetle because these mites are also interested in the carrion, but what they want to feed on are fly eggs or larvae. So they're using the beetle as a form of transportation, and so I like to think of it as the beetle bus. So they're hitching a lift on the beetle bus and they're getting off at the carrion bus stop. So they're taken underground, and it was previously considered that this was a sort of symbiotic relationship, but a little bit more research on it has found that that might not always be the case. These mites have been known to also feed on the eggs of the beetle as well, so not always true. Now, on the right-hand side here, what we have is an adult beetle feeding one of the larvae. So once the carcass is prepared and they have this beautiful nest set up underground, really, really beautiful, these parents the female will lay eggs, and the eggs will hatch into larvae, and the larvae automatically come to rest in the crater. And so this is really the very, very much like bird chicks in a nest. This is the sort of iconic nest setup. And what happens here is that the larvae will beg the parents for more food. And they'll do this by using tactile begging, where they'll rear up and touch the parents on the face. And the parents, they will pre-digest the flesh from the carcass and regurgitate to the young, which is really lovely. Really sweet family setup. There's all sorts of incredible behaviors and dramas going on within the burying beetle family. And you can see here a little video, if it will play for you, of a parent beetle lovingly tending to its mouse nest with some very, very small larvae in the middle there. Here's another cute photo for you. And they also stridulate, these beetles. So if you disturbed one, you might hear a squeaky sound. This is produced by this set of ridges in the center of the abdomen there. There's parallel lines. And what that is, it's called the pars stridens, and it's a little bit like, it's a series of ridges, and on the underside of the wings, there are tiny little hairs, and the beetle, when it moves its abdomen past its wings, it basically acts like a plectrum, and it creates a very squeaky noise. So I have a video here for you. Turn your volume right up now, and let's hopefully have a little listen to a beetle stridulating. Hopefully you could hear that one. Really, really squeaky, and probably not what you're expecting to hear from a beetle, and certainly not from a carrion beetle. So it's said that there are 3 types of stridulation with these beetles. They have the mating call, so the males stridulating to attract a mate. They have the defense call, obviously if there's a predator, and then the call to the larvae. So the parents maybe, if they're off tending to the corpse, cleaning up, maybe doing patrols in case any other rival beetles are coming in, they may call the larvae back to the nest, because once the larvae are old enough, they might start to self-feed and move around. I don't speak beetle, but I think that that's probably the defense call in that situation. So here's those hitchhikers I was talking about. You get a much better look of them here. What's funny is that they do tend to gather either on the pronotum or on the orange stripes, on the orange banding on the back of the beetle on its elytra. But now you have that insider info, you know that these are just phoretic mites. They're not harming that adult beetle, but sometimes you may encounter individuals with a huge backpack of mites, and that could cause some problems for the beetle's movement. They may not be able to fly quite as easily, and it also could cause the beetles to overheat as well. Here's a good example here, absolutely overloaded. And I will say it's not just the burying beetles that get these mites. It's also possible to see them on some of the other carrion beetles. And this one here is the red-breasted carrion beetle. You might recognize this one. It's a big fan of woodlands, and it's not too fussy in terms of its food. So it will go for carrion. It will also predate other insects that are on carrion. But it is also known to be found on dung and even some rotting fungus too. So a bit more of a generalist, this one, but is as equally as useful to these mites. So knowing what we know now, how wonderful these beetles are at doing what they do, can you imagine a world without them? It would be pretty grim, wading through corpses. There'd be dung everywhere if we didn't have the dung beetles. These beetles are really, really, really essential in our environment. Now, moving slightly on, because as I mentioned, there are a few predatory species in this group. Now, here's a species which is absolutely under-recorded in Scotland. So next spring, if you could do me a big favour, go out and have a look at oak trees, because this is one that lurks on oak trees where it's a predator of caterpillars, particularly moth caterpillars, I should say. Now, it's a very, very distinctive species. You cannot muddle this up with anything else. It has that lovely beigey brown colour at the background, and it's got these 4 spots on the elytra. So we've called it the caterpillar hunter. And as I said, definitely under-recorded in Scotland. So we'd love more sets of eyes looking out for it. The other predatory species is called the common snail hunter. Now you can see from this nice view here, this beetle has quite a narrow, skinny head, and this is essential for its behaviour. As I said, it's going for snails, and so here's a great action shot from Maria. The beetles use that narrow head to get right inside the snail shell. But before that, they will bite the foot of the snail. And at this point, you know, the snail's recoiled right into its shell. It also starts producing a defensive mucus. But the beetle combats that with an enzyme that can break through the mucus and start dissolving the flesh of the snail. So not very nice if you're a snail. Hey, but great if you're a gardener. You probably want to have some of these beetles in your garden to help maintain that balance. So yeah, a feisty little predator, and definitely one that we can be looking out for now. And I'll come back to that. So could carrion beetles also be pollinators? Surely not. That sounds a bit silly. So, well, if I tell you that if we were very far away from Scotland, in the wilds of Sumatra, where the wonderful Titanarum blooms, you may know or be familiar with the Titanarum if you've been to the Royal Botanic Gardens at any particular point where there's been one in flower. They're remarkable plants, and in the native homelands of that plant, it has been recorded that carrion beetles are some of the pollinators. If you're not familiar with this plant, it's one of those that releases a pungent stench, and it is utilizing carrion insects. So the tatty looking individual on the left here is a beetle from Sumatra called Dimesis osculans. and it's a close relative of one that we get in Scotland. So the one on the right is the species that we get in Scotland, and I'm not sure which year this was. It might have been 2020 or 2019. During one of the flowering events at the Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh, one of these beetles was attracted to the flower, which is cool, really cool. So I'm very invested in this group of beetles, so much so that I helped establish a recording scheme for them. Now, we have a wonderful long history of recording schemes in the UK. I think there's something like 60 different recording schemes. So we are one of many, and for a group that there was no existing scheme for. So in 2016, we set one up from scratch, and that was with myself, my colleague Matt Esch, and Richard Wright. So what we've done is produce some identification resources that we put online for free, basically to encourage more people to record these beetles. It was done out of a sort of personal interest of mine because I wanted to know what was happening with these beetles, were they declining? And the best way to do that was to get more pairs of eyes looking out for them. So we've hosted lots and lots of workshops. Obviously, those that are in person are the most fun. We set carrion traps, we do identification work at the microscopes, and it's really, really enjoyable. If you see one advertised in the spring, please do come along. I guarantee you'll have a lot of fun. So at this point, maybe Stuart can drop another link in the chat for you. Here is the kind of basic homepage for the recording scheme, but it's got that very important PDF that's going to give you all those tips and tricks on how to identify these beetles. Now, because that wasn't enough, during 2020, we published a book on these beetles too, in collaboration with Steve Lane and Colin Lucas, Steve Lane is our national expert for hysterids, which are the clown beetles. So you can see the beetle on the top part of the book cover here, that's a clown beetle. And though these are predatory, they are also found in carrion. So they're predators in the sort of carrion environment. And so it was a nice natural pairing because people that already recorded carrion beetles might then be interested and lured into recording clown beetles as well. So this book does everything. It's got all the information on the ecology of the different species. It's got distribution maps and phenology charts to show you what time of year the species are active. And it also talks about their conservation statuses. And to add to that, it's got identification keys too. So if you wanted to take it a step further, maybe get into clown beetles as well as carrion beetles, then this book might be for you. To add to the different types of trapping and collecting that we've already looked at, something that you can do if you're really interested in carrion beetles is to bait your traps. So you would have a pitfall trap like we talked about before, but this time you're going to have a lure. You're going to have something dead to attract those beetles in. Now, I get this is not everybody's cup of tea, but remember, these beetles are also attracted to light. So you can also run a light trap. And there are a number of species, these ones here, that you would get if you were light trapping. I have to remove just two of them because we're in Scotland. So that one, and not ones that we would get here. And also the one with the curved legs at the bottom, you're only likely to get that one if you're sort of in the borders, a bit closer to England. But the rest you could encounter in your light traps. And as the scheme, we would absolutely love your records. So please do send in your records to iRecord. That is our preferred platform. Others are available. And you will really be helping us to better understand these species. So now that we've got some good baseline data, we want to know what's happening with them, and you can help. And I said I was going to have a challenge for you. So this is your winter challenge. Now that you know about the common snail hunter, it's actually easier to find it during the winter. So this is a beetle that will overwinter as an adult, and it really likes to overwinter in rotting logs. So if there's a log that's still got the bark on, but it's a bit loose, have a little look and you may encounter one of these beetles, or you may be very lucky and you may encounter a whole little pile of them. So we would love you to take some pictures and to share your observations with the scheme. Now, if you're thinking about helping beetles, there's lots of things that you can do to support them. Some things that you've no doubt heard that are going to be beneficial for all wildlife, not just beetles. Things like not being too tidy with our gardens, obviously avoiding the use of pesticides and herbicides, planting native flowers and trees. But particularly for beetles, some great things to do is creating a pond, as we know. That could support some of those water beetles, some of the diving beetles. And if you've not got a garden, don't worry, neither do I. You could plant some window boxes. And that's also going to provide a little bit of food if it's a pollinating species, or even just a little bit of a stopover as they move through our urban landscapes. And one really wonderful thing that you can do for beetles is to create a log pile or a stumpery. So deadwood is a fantastic habitat for many, many beetles. Approximately 650 species of British beetle are associated with decaying wood. Now, those could be the ones that are feeding directly on the wood, or maybe feeding on the fungus that's developing on the wood. It may be predatory species that are seeking shelter there, or things like the common snail hunter, which is going to overwinter in a dead log. So it's a wonderful thing that you can do if you have the space to leave out some dead wood. Now, if you wanted a bit of an example of how some of these things work in practice, we've actually been implementing some big changes at our site where the museum collection is. And we have done various different things, like reducing the cutting of our grassland, including yellow rattle, the meadow maker plant, which is helping to increase the diversity of different species that we have. And we also leave plots of winter cover. So we leave some of those grassed areas to stay long over the winter. And we're also doing a lot of monitoring. But rather than hearing about it from me now, you could watch a mini documentary and learn a bit more about what we're doing, and maybe not just doing it at home, but maybe you could take this to your place of work and make some suggestions about what could be done there. Now, of course, one thing I've not touched too much on is identification. And with 4,000 species of beetle in the UK, you can imagine that some of them are very, very tiny, and identifying them is actually really, really tricky. So don't be too deterred. Start with those larger species, start with a hand lens and see how you get on. Taking photos and sharing them with others and getting a second opinion is the best thing to do. And then if you are interested in pursuing beetles further, it is going to require taking voucher specimens at some point. And so we have some resources on the museum website for you to learn how to do this process. You're also very welcome to get in touch or book in for a visit if you want to learn more about this. Another thing that you can do is get involved with the Coleoptera Society of Britain and Ireland. So do go over to the website. We've got tons of resources there that will link you to lots of free identification resources. And they also have meetings. And of course, share your finds. Really, what the goal is here is to be sharing that data so that ultimately we can help inform the conservation of beetles. So there's various different apps, different platforms you can use. I won't be biased about this. I'll let you make your own decisions. But really, as long as you are sharing that information, you are helping support beetles. So I'm going to wrap it up here and say thank you everybody for joining me. I really hope you've got some good beetle questions for me. And if you've got any that you think of later and you think, oh, I wish I'd asked Ashleigh, then please do feel free to get in touch.